Welcome to Module 1 of the series we call Learning About Federalism. Each of the 7 modules in this series is going to start with a question. And the question for this module is, why is federalism growing increasingly important to the world? Without some background, that question may be a little hard to answer. So before we try to answer the question, let's make sure we all have some basic understanding of what is federalism, what are its common characteristics, how has it evolved, and why have countries chosen federalism? What follows will provide the background to help us answer our first question for our first module.
What is federalism? It's a system of government which has at least 2 orders or levels of government established by a constitution. We refer to countries that adopt federalism as federations or simply federal countries. All governments in a federal country have a direct connection to the citizens, normally through free and democratic elections. In fact, one of the main reasons for adopting federalism is to make democracy as responsive to the citizens and effective as possible. 40% of the world's people live in federal countries. There are 28 federal countries, including some of the largest in area and population, such as the United States, Canada, Russia, and Brazil.
We normally differentiate federal countries from those that have a unitary system of government. In unitary systems, there is one constitutionally recognized order or level of government for the entire country. There may be regional or local governments, but in unitary countries, those are subordinate to the national government and not guaranteed by the Constitution. As you will see, federalism normally entails divided and shared sovereignty, in which all constitutionally recognized governments are democratically elected by the people.
What makes a country federal? First, it must have at least 2 orders of government. One for the whole country, the other for the regions or constituent units. Federal countries are made up of units that are called states, provinces, autonomous communities, territories, republics, or other names. Second, federal countries need written constitutions that say what the roles and duties of the different orders of government are. The national or central government is normally in charge of the armed forces and foreign affairs. State or provincial governments are very often responsible for schools and hospitals. Federal countries divide powers very differently for most other matters, such as the environment. Third, federal countries usually have an upper house of the central government, where the constituent units are represented. In Germany, it's called the Bundesrat, and in the United States and many other countries, it's the Senate. Fourth, a federal country normally needs a way of resolving disputes between orders of government. This is often a court, such as the Canadian or United States Supreme Court.
As a practical matter, the critical criterion is, do you have a constitution which allocates some real powers to both orders of government? And so that the lower level of government is not a creature of the central government. But there are countries that call themselves federal, which as a practical matter are very centralized. And there are also some countries which call themselves unitary, which have devolved quite a bit. So when you think about federalism, don't get too hung up on exactly who is and who isn't. Just think about devolved governance and how and what you could learn from looking at federal experience.
What has been the evolution of federalism, and why have countries chosen federalism? Most countries in the world have unitary systems without constitutionally divided responsibilities. They may have regional governments, such as those of France or Japan, which derive all their powers from the national government. While not federal, some of these countries are highly decentralized. The United Kingdom has even devolved powers over such matters as health care to the parliaments of Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Indonesia has transferred powers to its provinces and localities with special powers to Aceh.
The oldest federations, United States, Switzerland, Canada, Australia, they all became federations by what's called coming together. They had had separate units. The United States, the 13 colonies. Switzerland had been a confederation right back into medieval times, very loosely associated, quite sovereign, independent organizations. Canada had been 4 colonies, well, although one of them had been amalgamated, and Australia had been 6 colonies. So all of these came together to form a country. And at the end of World War II, we really only had those 4 federations in the world. There had been federal experience previously in Germany, which also had come together, and in Austria, which had been gone more the other way. But now we have 28 countries that call themselves federal, and you can play with the number. And some of those countries have actually appeared in quite different ways. They've, the recent experience in Spain, for example, or in Ethiopia, was of a country which was unitary and has decided, because of the regional or diverse character of the country, to decentralize into a federal form. So that's what some people talk about, coming together federalism and devolving federalism. And there are even countries which are a mix of the two. There's no one rule, but what's been particularly interesting in recent times has been the move of unitary countries to adopt a more federal form.
The first federal countries were the United States and Switzerland. The United States created its federal constitution in 1789, and it's still in force today. Switzerland adopted a federal constitution in 1848. Canada followed in 1867, when 3 British colonies came together. One split into the provinces of Quebec and Ontario to make 4 provinces in all. During the 1800s, a number of Latin American countries became federal on the U.S. model. Many of those countries went through periods of centralized dictatorship. Mexico, Brazil, and Argentina are now more democratic and more genuinely federal.
After the end of World War II in 1945, the great European empires in Africa, Asia, and the Caribbean broke up, and a number of post-colonial federations or federal countries were created.
Post-colonial federal countries include Pakistan, as well as Nigeria, India, and Malaysia. The giant Russian Federation is a post-communist federation. South Africa also has a federal system, although the South Africans do not use the word federalism because of its association with the previous apartheid regime.
In Western Europe, Belgium adopted a federal system in the late 20th century to allow for autonomy for both French and Flemish-speaking Belgians. And Spain, since the end of the Franco dictatorship in 1975, has developed a decentralized system that many describe as de facto federalism.
The resolution of conflicts sometimes results in federal political solutions. This happened in Bosnia, Ethiopia, Sudan, and in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Among countries currently considering federalism as part of a way of resolving ethnic conflict are Cyprus, Iraq, and Nepal. When we look at the growth of federal countries, we can see that they almost all change over time.
when the Americans drew up their constitution in 1789, after their period as a confederation, they thought they were creating a very decentralized country. Well, over time, the powers of the federal government have become extremely extensive in the United States. The Australians, when they drew up their constitution in 1900, thought that they didn't want the kind of centralized federal system that they thought the Canadians had opted for. They preferred a decentralized system like the Americans had opted for. But Australia too has evolved in a direction where it's become quite centralized. While Canada, which was designed by its founders to be quite centralized, has become very decentralized amongst federal countries. So there's no single answer to how countries evolve. Each country has its own character. And I think what you find is that the social and underlying political, economic nature of the country emerges over time and affects the way the Constitution operates.
Brazil and many other Latin American federations have had a number of constitutions. In Brazil's case, there were 7. The United States has kept the same constitution, but amended it 27 times in 200 years. India amended its constitution 94 times in 60 years. In 2010, Pakistan passed the 18th Amendment to its 1973 Constitution. Changes included reversing the centralized military system, restoring powers to the provinces, and transferring presidential powers to the Prime Minister's office. Federalism is not always best, and there is no single best version of federalism. Usually, for federalism to work, certain attitudes are necessary. Those include respect for the rule of law and minority rights, and a shared countrywide identity.
In this module, we've learnt about the relevance of federalism in today's world, the common characteristics of federalism, the evolution of federalism, and why countries have chosen federalism. So now, let's look at the first question that we asked at the beginning of the module. Why is federalism of growing importance to the world? Which of the following statements do you think best answers our first question? Federalism provides the opportunity to have governments at different levels, where power is divided and shared. By dividing government responsibilities and assigning them to different levels or orders of government, such as the federal order and the state-provincial order, federalism can effectively assure the democratic and human rights of the citizens. There is no single best version of federalism, and therefore it is very adaptable. Federalism is an appropriate system of government in countries with a large population or large territory, or very diverse populations. Federalism is a system of organizing government being turned to by many countries in post-conflict situations as a means to achieve stable governance. If you reflect on what we just learned about federalism, what we just saw, and what we just heard, I think you might say that the correct answer is all of these statements. All of these statements about federalism are true.